Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jill Weidman, and on behalf of the Territorial Institute, I'd like to welcome you to our roundtable event, National Security Implications of Cyber Risk to the SMB and SLTT Community. Before we begin, I'd like to share a little about the Territorial Institute, our session partner, and our sponsor. The Territorial Institute was created to promote collaboration across public and private sectors with a focus on business, culture, and diversity. We're looking to reshape and develop collaboration and partnering practices with a view to improving and securing business and economies. A core concept of the Institute is our think tank for partnership excellence. The think tank has allowed us to bring together experts and leaders from the public and private sectors and academia from around the world to reshape and develop collaboration and partnering practices while embracing the most critical technology growth. If you're not currently a member of the Institute, we invite you to visit our website to learn more and see how you can participate. I'd like to recognize our partner organization, the Association of U.S. Cyber Forces, for all of their support in helping us to put together this event. The Association of U.S. Cyber Forces is a nonprofit, military, and veteran service organization that provides the voice for cyber professionals who serve in the military and with other national security agencies, as well as within the industry, on specific cyber issues impacting national security. AUSCF is an advocate for positive change to policies and programs that better serve their membership and help minimize gaps between the private and public sector cybersecurity efforts. A special thank you to our sponsor for this event, Gorilla Corporation. Gorilla Corporation is a leading global sales, marketing, and technology channel development company with a focus on serving the technology industry. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Chuck Weissenborn, our moderator for this event. Chuck works at Dragos, where he leads the company's efforts to support the Department of Defense and intelligence community and their efforts to secure control systems and associated operational technologies. He is also a member of the Army National Guard. In this role, he leads the cybersecurity detachment for the Critical Infrastructure Protection Battalion, West Virginia National Guard. Chuck?
Thanks so much, Jill, and thanks everybody for joining us. Really blessed and humbled to have the opportunity to help guide the discussion and speak alongside such a group of distinguished panelists. And I'd like to take a minute to really thank everybody who supported the stand-up of this event, especially Nate Rolfe and Miguel Garibay. Thank you, gentlemen, for y'all's support, and Jill, yours as well. As Jill said, my name is Chuck Weisenborn. I work over at Dragos. And today I'm joined by an extra special group of panelists who have experience across government, industry, and then also other public sector environments. And so what I'd like to do to kick things off is just have each of the panelists go around the horn and introduce themselves and kind of outline your experience in state, local, small, medium business areas in particular. So we'll start with Terry. Go ahead, sir.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Terry Bazemore Jr. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at i3 Technologies, an 8A and economically disadvantaged women-owned small business specializing in systems engineering and cybersecurity. We're located in the gorgeous Prince George's County, Maryland, and we perform work in the DoD, IC, and proudly in our local community. As for my career, I have about 16 years experience. Wow, it seems like it's a lot saying that. Years of cybersecurity experience, ranging from cyber testing to cyber network defense to RMF to security engineering, working at places like Patent and Trademark Office, U.S. Cyber Command, different agencies varying, multiple different multitudes. Personally, I'm a dad to Terry III and Sarai. I'm a hubby to my double boss and wife, C and CEO Summer Bazemore. And a couple quick fun facts. I love Spartan racing. I buy too many sneakers, and I've just gained an obsession with grilling. So that's me. Passing the mic.
Awesome. Thanks, Terry. JD?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Chuck, and glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So my name is JD Harris, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer at Ascent Solutions. We're headquartered in Minneapolis, but we have people across the United States. We do a lot of different areas within cybersecurity. We do advisory services, so helping companies just understand what their roadmap needs to be and also how to guide their people through the change of implementing cybersecurity culture and practices. And we do a lot with systems implementations, a lot of different kinds of best of breed types of solutions. We are one of Microsoft's top global partners actually in cybersecurity. So we do a lot in conjunction with Microsoft as well as their technologies for their customer base. We do incident response. I think we are blessed to have the best team in the world for dealing with cybersecurity incidents that occur for firms. A lot of former Marines, as well as other branches of the military and other agencies. We do managed services, so helping companies who either can't afford or don't have the people to do cybersecurity well themselves. So we help them, guide them, do a lot of the heavy lifting for them. And we do education and training. We have a really strong apprentice program for basically taking anybody from any industry, any occupation, former occupation, and turning them into cyber warriors as long as they have passion and are very intelligent. And then finally, we do software engineering for technology-enabled services as well. So we have a ever-increasing group of important technologies that we're developing to help companies grow. So on the personal front, I'm married nearly 30 years, which probably makes me the oldest guy on the show. I have 2 kids, both out of the house and married as well. One of them is an ER nurse, and the other one also works for Ascent in cybersecurity.
Awesome. Thanks, JD. Leslie?
Hi, thanks for having me. So my name is Leslie Kershaw. I've spent 20 years in cyber operations. The first half of my career was in the Army and at the NSA doing on-net operations from the offensive aspects. So being the hacker on the other end. And then I moved into the commercial sector where I've been doing defense. I'm currently fundraising to build a cyber collaboration platform that would reduce incident response. So crowdsourcing incident response, letting the community help itself. And then I'm also a member of a nonprofit board, which is the National Cybersecurity Center based here in Colorado Springs. So aside of the Space ISAC, where we try to bring together people from a cyber perspective, the NCC also provides training to state and local governments to help them with cybersecurity aspects that every legislator needs. And then we also have just stood up a center that allows students within UCCS to be able to support giving a cyber look to small and medium-sized businesses, and that's open nationally to anybody. Chuck, I'll hand it back.
Awesome. Thanks. And last but certainly not least, Reed, you want to go ahead, sir?
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. So I'll start off with the fact that, Leslie, the nonprofit you spoke about, my role as a delegate, I benefited from that nonprofit and was able to help out and actually be the POC for the organization here in Maryland. So that is one of many titles that I have. They sound good, but it's just me. You guys are all smarter than I am about cybersecurity. So that's all right. So the first one is I'm a delegate in the Maryland House of Delegates. So just like a member of the House on the federal level, which is very great. And I'll hopefully be able to share some good stories about how we went through some cybersecurity bills that came up last year. I spent give or take 15 years, 4 months, 3 days on active duty in the Air Force. Not that I was counting, but I loved my service then. And then I joined the National Guard, which I've loved my service even more in the National Guard also. So I get to command some troops, about 400 cyber and intel professionals, who the majority of their job is at the Cyber Command Fort Meade area doing some of the offensive work. And then finally, I do work for a value-added reseller. I do business development for them, which is great. I love the fact that they pay my paycheck and they're very good to me with my other hobbies. And then, proud husband, proud father of an 11-year-old who is texting me right now, if you can hear my phone go off. But that's all I got.
Thanks, Ray. Appreciate it. So folks, once again, just thank you. Having y'all's breadth of experience again across multiple sectors. The diversity is incredibly important to this discussion. So I'd like to start out kind of level setting about the threat landscape, right? So we see cyber attacks every single day in the news. It just seems like every day there's a new version of ransomware. Somebody else is poking at critical infrastructure. About what are y'all seeing at y'all's levels and across y'all's customer bases when it comes to threat activity, and how serious should we be taking this?
I'd be happy to start.
Awesome.
Let's jump in. I think one of the biggest, most important things to understand, and it's not already obvious, is that threat actors don't discriminate. They look for where they can have access to any infrastructure anywhere. And often they don't even understand yet the size of the companies that they're attacking. They just know that there's vulnerability, and they know how they can actually get in. So that's one avenue. And I think the other one is, if you look at it, what's happening with social engineering. Again, everybody from every company gets phishing attacks, probably on a daily basis. And so again, they're not going to discriminate against small companies or even nonprofits. They may later, once they find out a little bit more, investigate the companies that are vulnerable. But so what that all means is that the threat is real. And I think all the agencies, federal agencies, agree on one thing, which is the greatest threat to national security is cybersecurity right now. And so what they haven't figured out is how to work together as agencies and how to work with the private sector on what to do about that problem yet. But we're getting there, and I think making some progress, at least intellectually, hopefully legally at some point.
Thanks, JD. I think one of the things I want to pull the thread a little bit. You mentioned, kind of a need for collaboration across both business and government. Leslie, given that you do work with some of the ISAC community, right, on the space ISAC, and that you're kind of working to build kind of a collaborative environment that'll help enable folks to do incident response better. Where do you see some of the wins that have happened in the collaboration space? And then also, where do you think that we need to spend more focal time?
Sure. So I think the genesis of where the government has moved from about 10 years ago to where it is now has been good. Like they're making a lot of progress, but we're still not at where we should be. And so if you look back 10 years ago during the OPM incident, we couldn't share information across the federal agencies to be able to help the organizations that were initially attacked and then help OPM. That took 1.5 years. And so you fast forward to now, we've put Jen Easterly in charge. She was in charge of an Army cyber organization that I was part of. She's now part of CISA. And she's making a lot of great efforts towards pushing information out to the public sector and trying to build more collaboration. Where I think we need to be is helping people understand where the government is going to help out, which right now isn't at all. And then where it's going to dictate where people should go for that kind of help. The NCC is trying to make some efforts into, hey, let us help you with your defensive. But what we really need to work on is every organization can be attacked. And so what do you do for incident response? And so instead of just providing legislation that forces people to comply and then report out when an incident happens, how do you help them during the incident? Because they're actually a victim. It's not just due to negligence, because an attacker can attack any organization. So how do we help them post-attack? And then how do we share that information out to other organizations? And I think that fluidity needs to happen more. In addition, I think the government needs to figure out how to leverage those military organizations throughout the states to be able to help with those widespread attacks as well. So how do we pull together the resources that are already in place to help organizations?
Hey, sure. Leslie or Chuck, if you don't mind, I'd jump in and add on to what Leslie's talking about. So many great points there. And I was very frustrated, and hopefully I won't come across as frustrated throughout the conversation, but very frustrated with trying to articulate to people who don't necessarily even understand the terms of cybersecurity, let alone the details of what are important and not. So as you can imagine, when you're legislating on any topic, and I don't claim to be an expert, more of an expert in cybersecurity than most of my peers in the legislature, but I don't I'm not a lawyer, I'm not any of those things, but I do have 22 years of experience, a couple of degrees, and a lot of time in the military doing these things. So Leslie, you brought up one thing, post-attack. We actually had a bill that during the draft, it actually mandated that vulnerability assessments had to happen every year. I was like, great, let's do vulnerability assessments. And then then you had to report out such detail about each state and local agency. It was basically like a hunting list. It was a target list. I was like, are you actually absolutely crazy? If I had that, I would grab the piece of paper and be like, oh, State Board of Elections hasn't done a vulnerability test on this percentage of their network. And here's the IP address. I mean, it was ridiculous. And so I get up and and this, I'll say this 1,000 times too. This should be a very nonpartisan issue. It should be. But if you're in one party or the other, depending on what state you're at, what federal level you're at, sometimes your arguments are dismissed because you're not in the majority party. So I got up and pounded the desk, and people would come over and like, you really know what you're talking about? I'm like, not as much as other people I know, not as much as people in this panel, but trust me when I say you're going to make things worse. Report that you got it done or not, but don't put that detail. I mean, that's, share it behind the scenes in a public forum. And again, the government, I will say this often, doesn't necessarily know what they don't know if they're going to cause a negative effect or a positive effect when they put in some of this legislation. So it just gets me fired up, Leslie.
Hey, Chuck, if I can hop on the piggyback and that fired up talk there. I kind of love two things that were just said. Everything that was said, but two things I want to kind of bring out specifically. Kind of go back to the first question. JD said that the threats are non-discriminate. And then we also heard that, this is nonpartisan, saying it should be. And I think that part just shows how big of a threat we're facing, right? It doesn't care about your political party or thoughts. It doesn't care if you're a small business or a large business. And then talk about the help, right? So if I'm a small business, how am I protecting myself against the same attack that a large business is facing, right? Like I'm mom and pop, cybersecurity. How am I going to protect against what Lockheed Martin is being attacked with, right? And so we really do need more, I think, more effective, I think leadership and more effective direction and help from the government in these areas. And I think that definitely shows how the threat attacks are definitely far more reaching than what I think we want to admit. Whatever. And sorry, I won't get fired up either, Delegate Reed. I'll go ahead and mute my mic now.
I think this is an easy area to get passionate about, just because what our state and local communities and municipalities do for the citizens of their areas is so critical and important. Just the basics of day-to-day life. I mean, on the Drago side of the house, we continue to see nation state actors and others touch and position themselves to be able to potentially impact critical infrastructure here in the United States, and having the ability to execute response effectively and at the speed necessary is absolutely incredibly important. And all of y'all are right? It takes a village to make all of that happen. And that village includes everybody from the federal side of the house all the way down to members of the small, medium, large business communities working alongside of each other, sharing what's going on and what folks are seeing. And I'm encouraged by some of the activity. CISA has done a lot of work with JCDC, the Joint Collaborative Cyber Defense Platform. But there is, Terry, and Reed, to y'all's point, there's still a reluctance to share enough information that matters. And that also goes back to government to industry, right? So what are you guys seeing from that perspective, right? Is the government sharing enough information about what's happening across the threat landscape for folks to make informed decisions?
I'll say no. So part of my job while I was in the government was my agency had forward deployed me to DHS's cyber center at the time. And what would happen is once an organization was attacked, they would be notified that you were attacked, but that would be the end of it. And so they weren't provided with any information about how to mitigate that attack or where to go to get help. And so I don't think that's enough information. And even with the JCDC, that's only for certain industries. That's not for everybody writ large. So if you're a small or medium-sized organization, you have no insight into what attacks are occurring and how to mitigate that. So it would be nice to have a place that those types of organizations could go to get that type of information. And I don't think that we're doing enough currently, but it's also still a new environment and they're still trying to make some progress. So I have to give them a little bit of credence there.
Yeah, I think one of the other challenges in the space is the speed at which things are shared. Things within the cyber spectrum change minute to minute, day by day. JD, as a business owner, what are your needs, right? What do you need met from your government partners, both federal, state, and local?
Yeah, I think it's honestly it's the same thing I think every small business needs, which is early education. If you look at the type of attacks that we're going to have on us, even as a cyber firm, it's probably not actually a lot of physical infrastructure types of attacks. We're completely in the cloud, with everything that we do, and we rely on third parties, even though we have responsibility in that as well. But the things that are going to get us are like social engineering around phishing and those types of things, where you can test internally all you want, but that's a culture change. And I kind of liken, our industry is super young, cybersecurity being the industry. And I like to liken it or compare it to where safety was in manufacturing like 50 years ago. And not to be crude, but if you were in a factory environment 50 years ago and someone lopped off a digit on an unsafe machine, like you brought that person out the back door, got them to the hospital, got them fixed, brought them back, you never talked about it. You certainly didn't share that information broadly, right? You didn't do anything to change the environment in your manufacturing facility. Fast forward to now, you walk in, you have hard hats, glasses, ear protection, machinery is barricaded off. Like, safety is a thing. You have briefings constantly. You can't enter the facility even as a visitor without getting safety briefing. That's where we got to get cybersecurity to. So my soapbox, really, when it comes to even like a lot of this funding and so forth, is we got to get way further left of bang, right? Left of the incident that actually occurs. It's got to be education and culture changing, giving everybody a passion for protecting what we have in our assets, and giving them a strong understanding of how easy it is for bad things to happen. And so, to me, that's what we need. We do it a lot internally, but that's what every organization needs, and that's an area. I don't think a government can provide a lot of IT assistance. That's not going to be a thing for small businesses. It's just not affordable for the government or those small businesses, but they can provide a lot of education. And we need a ton of that. People just don't get this cyberspace. That's generally, we'll go on for just a couple seconds more, but I try to talk to as many CEO groups as I can. And it's super interesting to me when I talk about basic table stakes things, like, do you have MFA in your organization? What's MFA? Well, you know that thing you do when you log into your bank account and they send you a text and you got to put in a number? Well, that's one form of MFA. Do you have that in your company? Like, no. And I wouldn't want it. It's too much hassle, right? So basic education with senior executives isn't even there, much less the broader small business population.
Sure. Yeah, so you mentioned some of the work, and a couple of folks have made mention of some of the work that folks like CISA are doing. And last month, CISA announced a grant program focused on assisting state and local governments with cybersecurity efforts. And I think the dollar amount of the grant will end up to be over $1 billion over 4 years. Is that enough in y'all's opinion? Is that dollar amount the right dollar amount? And then also, are enough people aware that this program exists to take advantage of it? And Reed, do you want to start out on that? And then I'd really like everybody's opinion on this one. Over.
I was hoping Terry would go first, but I'm good. All right. So one of the things we're talking about too, and JD brought it up, Leslie brought it up, Chuck, you asked about it too, was how we are sharing. And this is, and I'm an optimist, I promise, but I'm just going to share some of my experience when you hit that level above the 7th level of layer of the OSI stack. One of those is politics, right? So most literally politics. When we were working, like as a guardsman, when we were working in a county in Maryland, multiple counties doing things, some counties in the city of Baltimore didn't want to deal with us because we were attached to the governor who happened to be of the other party, and they didn't want to be embarrassed. It's just like stockholders in a company. They don't want to be embarrassed by some leak saying that they were hacked and then the stock goes down. Well, same for the county executive or whomever, the mayor, whatever. If their systems are not secure, that's actually an embarrassing thing to them. So reference the money that we are pushing out there. You can do a lot for money, but I think you can hear with JD, I think culture is actually more important than money in a lot of situations. You always say you can't surge trust. So one of the examples, and we've all got some experience in the military. So in the National Guard, we were asked not to go in to help a specific area because we had not had that trust built up over the years. But then the reverse is true. If we had, done joint exercises, do those kind of things, then immediately they call us. And we had great work with like the state CISO and those kind of things. They would call us the second that something happened, and we would go and help them. So yes, we can buy a lot of things. But again, it is, maybe the things we need to buy is have JD come out and talk to all the, elected officials and talk to the small business owners and just say, hey, you gotta do this, and then the money will come also. But again, some of those basics of just allowing people to come in, having trust with another organization, those things are hard to put a number on, but they're almost more important than just spending money after it.
Sure. Terry, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. I like what Reed said, man. I like a couple of things. I would want to say, JD, I'm trying to figure out how to use that safety analogy in the speech somewhere soon. I got to figure that out. Thank you for that.
There's an article coming out where I use it, so you can plagiarize it all you want.
There it is. I'll give credit. I definitely will give credit. Man, so for this one, I'm like Reed. My parents, they kind of instilled in me to always be optimistic on things, right? So I promise I have rose-colored lenses at times, but I'll just bear with me. I'll get to it, right? So with that in mind, the fact that this CISA piece even exists and we're talking about this, I think it's a great thing, right? You know what I'm saying? I would have to say, will it make a difference? My answer is pretty non-committal. I'll have to say maybe. And while I know that's non-committal, just hear me out. While it's a great start and will make, I believe, a difference, I don't know if it's going to make the difference that's immediately needed, if that makes sense. And I just look at it this way. The attack surface and responsibility of many local governments is so far reaching. We look at what ransomware did over the past 5 years, kind of the pre, during, and post-COVID phases of things, to hospitals, to small businesses, to police departments and school systems. Baltimore even being hit with one, and an average of $5 million, I just don't think is going to give what we think it's going to give. I think without proper planning, without proper education, that was mentioned, then you'll be giving money that would become a drop in a bucket. Now, my parents did instill in me a thankful mindset. So I come back to say, this is great. It's a great start. And I'm just excited to see how it will help out in the long term. But right now, I don't think it's going to give what they're believing it will give, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Oh, one last thing. I was going to say real quick.
Sorry,
I did not know about this until very recently. So I want to answer the last part. No, it wasn't. This wasn't broadcast in a broad way to where I knew that this was even a thing until recently.
Sure. JD?
I'll maybe take a different slant on it, not disagreeing actually with what the others have said at all. In fact, in violent agreement. But I think that there's this great book about charitable giving. It's called When Helping Hurts. And what it really is about is if you help certain charities, especially overseas, and you don't do it in the right way, it can actually be harmful. And I think getting organizations reliant on the government for their cyber safety and cybersecurity, I think, is dangerous territory. I believe the government can do a ton with education. Now, I'll keep harping on that. Similar to when, nonprofit organization like the 70s, I won't mention because it might be polarizing, but they did a big campaign for firearm safety in the home. And it was targeted towards children, what to do if you see a firearm. It's called Eddie Eagle. It's super successful, right? They educated. They didn't try to say, people don't have guns in their home, or do this a certain way, or don't do that. But what they said is we just got to educate. And, we're dealing with that same sort of thing right now, where people don't understand the severity. They don't understand the impact of ransom. They don't even understand that they should never pay the ransom. They just, can I afford it? No, wrong answer. Can I insure against it? Wrong answer. Those are things to ponder and think about. However, what we really have to do again is educate. I think this amount of money, which is why I say differ a little bit, I think can go a long way if applied properly and isn't towards creating technical solutions. Because what we've definitely discovered in this industry is technical software-related solutions to cybersecurity don't work by themselves. This is a people problem, right? people before process, before technology. So if we address things in that order, and the people side starts with education, I think that money can be potentially used for good things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a huge fan of the people aspect of the cybersecurity field. At the end of the day, it's somebody sitting behind a keyboard interacting to an extent with somebody else sitting behind a keyboard elsewhere. And you can have all the technology that you want. It can be the best technology in the world, but if you don't have enough folks who are trained to operate and maintain that equipment and that software, you're going to end up with boxes collecting dust on a shelf. Leslie, do you want to tie this one up for us?
Sure. So I agree with everything everyone said, to include Terry in saying I didn't know about this. And so I didn't know about this, and I'm guessing the people that need this money probably also did not know about this. And when these large grants come out, given that I don't know about this, I don't know what the requirements were for this grant. But what worries me, what keeps me up at night, is thinking about a cyber 9/11 and what happens to our nation if we get attacked holistically against one portion of our infrastructure that's critical to sustain our livelihood. So what I'd like to see is money like this be focused in the areas that are critical to our country's survival and to, impact people's lives. My second thought is we don't have good communication mechanisms between those small companies to be able to send back to the government that this attack is happening in a widespread way. So what I think we see is, like, within a few weeks or so, we'll see that a widespread attack is happening. And there needs to be better linkages between the commercial sector and the government so the government can respond. So when we think about we don't allow right now commercial entities to hack back, but the government can. And so the government, I feel like, should be doing that on behalf of our country when we're seeing these large attacks occurring. And that needs to happen more rapidly, but that only happens by providing those communication pathways that we don't have.
Sure. And I do think that what Cybercom has accomplished recently, there's been some publicized work that they've done, has been outstanding, right? The ability to recover ransomware dollars from adversaries that has been in the news over the past year. I mean, that work is essential, and it sends a message across. And I agree with you. I think that in addition to what we are doing, I think we have to be better at advertising strategically what we're doing as a deterrent mechanism. Because if we keep it in the dark, right, the threat actors that may think that we're an easy target, low hanging fruit, no impact, right, may affect their cost benefit analysis to their operations. I'd like to hit on one thing on the dollars and cents side of the house. Some of the things that I've seen as a guardsman that have been really successful have been regional exercises that bring together private companies and utilities alongside National Guard, alongside federal organizations and entities. One of those is Cyber Yankee, that's held up in the northeastern portion of the United States. And I encourage anybody in the community that is kind of thinking about what we could do to take a look at that model, right? Because you're right on the money when you talked about the need to build trust between organizations. When there's no trust, nobody's going to pick up the phone and call folks. But when you develop trust and you have a relationship, the government may not be the boots on the ground, response folks, but the government may at least know that there is something going on to be able to trigger those educational efforts and additional outreach. So I'd like to encourage folks on the call and who are listening in, look at areas that are being successful like that, bringing in public-private organizations together. I think that's critically important to our national security as a whole. So going back to the grant, one of the requirements is for local governments to stand up a cybersecurity planning committee and then develop cybersecurity plans for their jurisdictional areas. We've hit on workforce once. I think a lot of folks are familiar with the fact that there is a shortage of cybersecurity professionals in the workforce. We've also touched on the fact that from a corporate and business side of the house, that there's an education gap amongst both leadership and folks at kind of that operational middle level. Is requiring the stand up of a planning committee like this, is it reasonable, feasible, and achievable? Reed, you want to start with this one?
Oh, please. I'm typing notes as you're saying this out loud. Terry, I'm going to say this again. I promise I'm an optimist, but whenever you give a politician the opportunity to make a mistake like this, they probably will. And I say that because I was frustrated because there is a cybersecurity committee actually in Maryland, which is great. We have a joint committee on cybersecurity, and it has Republicans and Democrats, people from the House and the Senate, which is awesome. So when I went down to the House, I'm like, hey, great. I want to serve there. I might have something to say that might be able to help. The person who leads it on the Senate side, I'm running against them. So they appointed someone who sells firearms for a living versus a guy who's got 20 plus years of cybersecurity. So it was embarrassing, in my opinion, that they would even do that because it's political. So I hope that they at least have some resumes out there, and you're not appointing a friend who might, be a great business person who sells cars for a living. But yeah, if they get a couple of people, because Maryland's a great example. We have some of the best cybersecurity professionals in Maryland around because we have great educational institutions. We have the federal government, we have NSA, Cyber Command, all those kind of things. So we have some really smart people around here, but you gotta get it further past the political threshold. And that I'll stop beating that drum in a second, I promise. But having a planning committee is great. Got to stack it with those great individuals. And we got to do it in that way. So I'll stop there, Chuck, before I go too far down a rabbit hole.
Yeah. And I agree with you, Reed, that it's not about having people. It's more about having the right people and enabling them. And that's a challenge, especially in the government where we have a typically rigid structure. And then even more so in the Defense Department where we have both a rank and file structure, right, alongside, folks that are aligned to specific jobs and tasks. I think, organizations that are allowing their folks to leverage their skills in the best way possible and be flexible are awesome. Leslie, any thoughts on the planning committee and planning requirements?
So I understand the point of having each jurisdiction plan for themselves because they know what's best, but it would be great to have an example. So understanding what the government would like to see, and then having maybe a group of people from the cyber community helping them develop that plan and strategy, I think would make a lot more sense. And then giving people a template of what they should be working towards. Otherwise, you're just kind of throwing money at the problem and hoping for a good outcome.
Amen,
awesome.
Leslie. Good.
Terry, any additional thoughts there?
Sorry. Yep. So I hope nobody throws tomatoes at the screen when I say this and it starts booing. But I actually kind of like this part of the grant, right? And I say it only because of this, right? I think we've all seen ill-fated good ideas and great intentions that produce wasted money and efforts, right? I think everybody has been a part of that or seen that in some sort. So I think by taking the time and effort to put together a cybersecurity planning committee and developing a plan, in the optimistic side, Reed, I'm looking only optimistic. I know there's another side to this, whatever. I'm hoping for checks, balances, accountability, and hopefully we'll thought out plans for each state. That's what I optimistically hope for. But to your point, and something I had not considered, whatever, is that you still will have that level of, personal interest that may still infiltrate its way into this very thing. So even the most, I think, well-intentioned aspect still has to filter through, people's intentions, and I think that part can always play a part. But the optimistic side, again, kind of coming back through, what I hope this does is I hope it gets local governments that aren't able to comply with the requirement in order to meet the grant initially to start thinking about it now, to start planning for that committee, start planning and creating their plans now so that they can start to get that stuff through the process. And maybe even, hopefully incorporate some, cybersecurity small business leaders and medium-sized business leaders on that committee. Because I know part of it, I think, is to have one half of them have to be cybersecurity professionals. So I think it'd be great to have people from the community and people who are part of it on that committee as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, so there's a couple of comments in the chat asking questions about DCORA, which is Defensive Cyberspace Operation Response Actions. in DoD parlance, and kind of the hackback mentality, right? That I think, Leslie, you mentioned earlier. So I think that we have to be very careful when we're executing those. But at the same time, our government does have a responsibility to protect our citizens and our organizations and their interests. And when we look at the impacts of cyber attacks and the potential, the financials, right? And we start looking at the national security landscape and we think about the small businesses that maybe are making a very specialty component for something that's important to our national infrastructure. The impact of a cyber attack that could take out that type of organization that may be the only people that can produce a critical part. I think it's important for us to have flexibility there. Reed, on the guard side of the house and your defense experience, I'd love to hear kind of your opinion about what does right look for you in that space.
Yeah, this is one of those issues that I'm actually conflicted about because, sitting as a business owner, I would love to be able to hit the button that says, okay, you hit me, I can hit you back. Our laws are not set up that way, as you can imagine. And this is where the cyber domain does not quite translate to the physical domain when we're trying to make these analogies. So, for example, you said we have the government has the right and the responsibility to protect our citizens and our businesses and our country and all those kind of things. They do. But we also, if we were going to translate that to bombs, right, we also don't allow a small business to lob a bomb toward North Korea if they get hacked, right? That's the federal government's, the military's role. So, at what point does this, hey, everything we do in the physical world translate perfectly in the cyber world? I just don't think there's a one-to-one, especially with the hackback things. Like I would hope, and I'll say this probably in my final thing, when we wrap everything up, what makes America great actually makes us very vulnerable in cybersecurity. I mean, we've all heard of the great cyber wall or cyber firewall of China, right? That's because they can dictate, and Russia has similar things. They can dictate, you're a company, you're a county, you're a state, you have to do this. That makes them better in cybersecurity and makes us better as a country because we don't have that dictatorial ability to just say, do all these things. So when we're talking about hackback, it's one of those things where I think I could be convinced either way that it's a smart idea. What I don't want to do, because international norms are still not formed, Sony hack and whatever, they're not formed like traditional world. If we shut off someone's ventilator to a president in a bad country because we misfired a hackback and we ended up often, some dictator's uncle, are they going to start a war with us? Like it's unpredictable. And we have some norms, but they're not settled like the physical world. So it's very, that's a great political, this will be my political answer for the day. I'm just very conflicted. I've thought a lot about it. I've talked a lot about this, but I'm very conflicted about the hackback from the private sector. It's just so touchy.
Yeah, definitely. And somebody just mentioned posse comitatus and some of the considerations there. I think that's the great thing, around the National Guard in particular, is that there can be a dual role, depending on what status you're in, right? And I don't want to dive into the technicalities because we could talk for probably days about the authorities and the difference between state active duty and Title 32 federal and Title 10 federal. But for everybody on the panel, what do you guys think the role of the Defense Department should be in supporting these efforts? JD, you want to? Yep. Go ahead, Leslie.
So back during the DDoS attacks against the banking system, that was, I think, one of the first times that we saw the government kind of responding at large against this attack, which is arguably part of our critical infrastructure. And so it was at that point that we defined, at this monetary threshold, this has become a level of an attack that we're going to engage and start to support you. And so I'd like to see a more proactive measure from the government stating that for each of these critical infrastructure sectors, this is the point that we're going to step in and assist you. So not necessarily the hat back, but this is where our incident response team is going to proactively come and engage, whether it's a loss of life at a hospital because somebody has attacked their power, or a nuclear power plant infrastructure being infiltrated. So I think more proactivity from the government is needed. So I don't want to get into the conversation of what the government should and shouldn't be doing from the offensive perspective, but I think we should define those thresholds.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a massive push and surge towards working with the private sector, working with commercial firms. There has to be. I heard a FBI individual leader speak recently, and he got asked this question from the audience about, like, why can't you guys do more? and it was a primarily private sector audience, and he said, because you guys get all of our best people. They make more money when they come to the private sector. And so you start to look at just the obvious economics, and we are going to get the best people. The Marines give out these awards for their best IT people in every sector. Guess who got their best intel person in all the Marines? We did. Right? We went after that person. We're like, we would love for you to join us, be in a great community of like-minded folks, and also be able to, make a boatload of money in the process and have fun doing what we do, right? So until the mentality of the federal agencies and everybody and the congressmen and women honestly changes to the fact and the understanding that we're losing the war. And so we can't just continue in a defensive posture. And I don't mean going on the offense all the time, but a defensive posture around us, which is just, let's just react. And let's throw money at when attacks occur. How do we fix them better or faster? How do we create more intelligent software to deal with the attack? That's all a losing strategy. We need to front foot this thing to say, how do we actually partner in the right way? So if we're doing anything that looks, feels, smells like a hackback, that it's done in appropriate ways. So the private sector is not throwing bombs, right? But in the same vein, the government didn't create those bombs because they didn't have the skills or the resources to do it. Private sector company made bombs, and the government decides where to deploy them, how and when, and the right people to deploy them. So if we can have a mentality like that says, okay, if the private sector has all the talent, or most of the high-end talent, we need those people. So how do we do that well? And I think a lot of attention needs to be spent there fast.
Definitely. Terry?
Yeah, man, shoot. I'm gonna yield my time to the panel. I think they pretty much answered this one, but I'll just say that I definitely took a liking to a couple of things that of course everybody said, but one thing that Leslie was saying, just in kind of like the lines of the rules of engagement, right? Just kind of defining and understanding what that is, and then the government can come in and assist in what way, because I do believe that they do have a responsibility to protect. And I know it's hard, like what Reed said, and it's definitely difficult to determine between physical and cyber. You can't do the exact same thing on both sides. While there are similarities, it doesn't always equate the same. But I think just having, that conversation, start to discuss what are the rules of engagement, and not for necessarily, I don't think a company should actually execute this. I think it should have to go through, another set of processes or whatever, because you'll have JP Morgan attacking Bank of America, and other stuff going on or whatever, and we don't want to see anything like that, right? So I think that it does have to have a level of rules of engagement to it. Yield my time to the panel.
Yeah, I think, Leslie, I love kind of what you talked about. I think having a framework, right, where people understand what the lines of efforts are, where the delineation between private practice, commercial businesses sit, I think is incredibly important. It would do a couple of things for asset owners, for business owners, and for the cybersecurity community as well, so that we're not treading on each other's toes. So I feel like sometimes there's a little bit of friction between government, cybersecurity folks, and private industry, and that sometimes there seems like a feel that, the government's trying to do something that private industry has the capability to execute. JD, on the business side of the house, have you experienced any of that? Have you felt any of those similar feelings?
Sorry, Chuck, could you just repeat the question for me? I was actually just contacting the users. Question online, so sorry.
Yeah, so sometimes it feels like there's friction between government and cybersecurity companies, right? Where maybe it feels like the government is trying to extend capability too far down. Have you experienced that, some friction in that kind of balancing act?
More in the past than I think now. I think there is much more of a desire for a collaboration, and I think it's just the how that everybody is trying to figure out. There's a few years ago, I think there was a lot of Heisman when you wanted to even entertain the notion of working together. And now, and just recently, I was with a bunch of 2 or 3 stars, and there was more of a thank you for engaging with us atmosphere. So I think the first important steps are taking place. I think we have to get more technically astute, though. Again, within the congressional ranks, if they can't even, they don't even know the last name of Facebook CEO or how to pronounce it. Like, that's a problem. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? They don't know what TCP/IP means. They don't know what the threat actors are really doing. They don't have a clear understanding of motivation sometimes. And so all of that education, that's just a technical education. It's a criminal mind education as well. I think it has to occur. I don't know if that answers your question.
Maybe I can take it from the other side, JD, if that makes sense too. Serving the Guard, I've had members, some of my peers in the past say, well, we need to make sure, and we've talked about critical infrastructure a little bit here, we, the National Guard, need to make sure that big company X that provides energy to all of Maryland is secure if they get hacked. And I kind of do this like RCA look. And like, they're a multi-billion-dollar company. Like, if they don't have a SOC that's doing 24/7 ops, that's responding to this defensive, yada, yada, how are part-time guardsmen going to come in and save them from this? The only thing I will disagree, and I love the fact that I'm in the Guard now and I was on active duty before. I love, JD, the fact when I get a super smart guy who works for you most of the time and then me part of the time. And then we make them the best, right? And I think, Chuck and I are both in that situation where we get outside experience bringing into the Guard and vice versa. Then you have someone who might be working. I love bragging on my members, so I'll bring up a few. I have a member who works for part of DHS, but does election security for them, does the red team for election security as a full-time asset. And then on the weekend, she helps me in the state of Maryland if we're going to go do an election security thing. So it's amazing when you get that alignment of people. And we have people who work at energy companies and all these kind of things where they have some of that background and they can bring it back in and back out. But we're the government, or I am the government, and I'm here to help. Doesn't always work for, and I know that's big companies. Smaller companies, let's put out some standards. Let's figure out how we get them to better. The small and medium companies, make sure they're getting the right resources and pointing in the right direction. But some of these big companies, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, we're not going to, like the National Guard, even Cyber Command probably doesn't have a ton on them, if that makes sense. They might have overseas intel that's better, more unique, all those kind of things, but not a ton of cybersecurity experience that we don't have in the private sector also. So it is definitely a partnership, but both sides need to understand that they bring something to the arrangement and the partnership, and it's not a one size at all, one side doing all the work.
Reed, I want to pile on to that, because that's actually a brilliant comment, I think, honestly, in notion for where we could go. So you think about our reservists right now that do spend time. They love that time. They love serving our country in that way. And I would contend that many, I don't know if it's most, but many cybersecurity professionals do have a feeling of a higher calling. They feel they are there to protect not just companies, but to do things on behalf of our country. And if they were invited into programs where they could do that on a regular basis, maybe it is one weekend a month or a few weeks a year or whatever. I think you would see a lot of people saying, I want to do that. And you would see a lot of companies say, we are willing and we desire our people to do that. Because we want to save the world, right? That's our goal.
Yeah.
And that's our people's goal. So I think looking at even that, I don't know what else to call it. I'm naive when it comes to some of these things, but a reservist type of program that doesn't start with boot camp service and then when you're out, you can now do this part-time. It really starts with an invitation wherever you're at in your career. You could be in your 50s and 60s. You're brilliant in cybersecurity. You can help the cause.
So JD, there are a few opportunities, and I use Maryland as the example, but many states have them. We actually have a uniformed militia that's not a Title X associated reserve component, either the reserve or the guard. And it's a state militia, and they actually have a really great cyber program. And I think that goes somewhere, right? That's like 20, 30 people in Maryland, and they do a lot of education and training for different people. But to your point, there is a need. I think this is almost like Civil Air Patrol, if you're familiar with it. Right. So Civil Air Patrol can have cyber people also. They don't just have to do search and rescue, which is what they help a lot of the civilian force with. But a Civil Air Patrol equivalent in cybersecurity is not necessarily a terrible idea. The problems we have, though, is that one person is going to mess it up for all those people who want to be altruistic and help out. Mm. And that one person is going to do it for financial gain, or they're going to implant something, or the one person. And we're very risk averse, especially when we're starting up organizations and we're doing things in law, codifying things in law, that we would be afraid, the one percenter is going to, ruin the 99%. Again, I want to figure out a way that we can do exactly what you're talking about, get the 99% in, make sure we weed out, and it's not a security clearance thing, because we can't give all these people security clearances, right? But how do we, because they might want to do, they might want to smoke pot on the weekends, right? So we're not going to get them an NSA, security clearance. So how do we enable that? I want to say it takes you, me, this panel, a larger group of people to actually discuss through what that means. And then we create these organizations, we partner, and it's part about being an American, being a Marylander. You want to have that pride in what you're doing on the weekends is not playing video games online. I don't play video games online, but you might be actually helping out a small business defend themselves. So it's awesome.
And I think until we get to D-Day, right? And I think we're approaching D-Day from a cyber perspective. So I think we're going to have to find some opportunities to take calculated risk.
Copy all.
Yeah. So I think, Reed, I've been a big fan of kind of the state militia concept for cyber for a long time. It's one of the reasons why I joined AUSCF, because there's a recognized need amongst members of the community for an entity that has in-depth subject matter expertise, maybe not full-time, right? But where we can reach and we can grab folks across different domains. And I think that opportunity, given today's current statutes and authorities and some of the problems of today, could be very meaningful. I think we're seeing some successes. A couple of states have focused their state guard, another word for militia, kind of set up right. South Carolina is an awesome example of that. I had some great interactions with their team. It really makes me proud as a citizen, right, to see folks stepping up and having the ability, right, and the framework and the structure to be able to do things like that. I think that's something everybody at the state level across the United States and the territories needs to take a very, very strong look at. One of the other challenges in that area is that some folks who want to give back in that way may also be in the National Guard already. And so there's actually some authorities and some challenges there in that we've got folks that are currently serving, be a Title 32 drilling status, that want to be involved in those efforts and can't be due to various reasons. So again, it's about enabling people in vetting people, right? To your point, we got to make sure that we have the right people doing things for the right reason. So on the critical infrastructure side, there's definitely a lot of involvement and focus over at CISA, as there is from DOE and TSA. We just saw a couple of recent directives posted around the water sector, right? A revision around pipeline cybersecurity. And so government agencies are starting to really look at things in those sector risk management agencies, right? SRMAs that are responsible for those individual areas are starting to get more involved. Do federal agencies need additional authorities to direct and support actions at lower levels at like state and local, or should somebody else be working that problem set? What do you guys think?
I don't think they have the resources, so I think we can. I hate to say, kind of almost to some degree start and end there, but assuming they did, then I think there's a role there. I think there just has to be a cautionary tale around kind of where we put authority and power. So, but I think it has to start with just the fact that they don't have the resources to do it.
Sure. Terry, I saw you pop off mute.
Yeah, sure. So I popped off mute to say that I don't feel qualified to answer this question. I'm going to eat my popcorn on this one, but I did want to just voice my opinion anyway, right? Since I'm here, right? So I will say, in all honesty, the fear factor that I have, probably the one time I'll take off the optimism, is that a lot of times when other organizations and entities are stood up, we don't see them operate well. And maybe it takes time for that to happen, but sometimes it adds in more bureaucracy and red tape. And what we end up doing is really negating the effective change we were looking to actually get or serve. And so I am kind of skeptical, depending on what organization it is and what authorities they give. I think that part will be very telling, saying whatever to actually partner down. I do think there's another aspect of this of like setting up like auxiliaries within states to kind of amplify the voice of the state. I think in some ways that can be helpful, but designating authorities to I just don't know maybe enough in that area to say that it would be effective or good. So let me grab my popcorn and hear what the rest of the panel has to say.
Thanks, Terry. Leslie, do you want to comment on this one?
This one's hard. So I don't know how the state would compete with the commercial marketplace to try to obtain the talent to be able to help. That's going to be a continuous problem. So maybe defining a way that, they use the guardsmen, they use these auxiliary people, but then incentivize businesses to also participate in some way. So I don't know what that looks like, but maybe having, your in-state local cybersecurity experts come together and come up with solutioning for the state on what they think is appropriate. And then try to find some way to incentivize that so that they're willing to participate.
So I think you just hit on something very interesting, right? Folks within a state, local territory, bringing ideas to the government. And I think that we struggle, right, with providing an avenue for private citizens to contribute in a meaningful way to some of those discussions. You read from your hat as a delegate, would something like a joint legislative and private industry working group be an answer to that? What do you think right looks like?
So you're right. We don't necessarily take input from the right professionals all the time very well, and creating something like a joint partnership. But I know many states have, and let me give you this example. For instance, in Illinois, a good friend of mine, mentor, was a colonel, and then the governor came in and said, I want to concentrate on cybersecurity. Elevated that person to be the tag, the adjutant general, the 2-star. So they went from being an 06 to being the 2-star in a matter of a couple of years. But it was because they wanted to put that focus on cybersecurity. It takes that type of leadership, and the Guard is not the answer to everything. I'll be the first to say that, but it takes that type of dedicated, top down, this is important to me type of energy, because I can tell you that, some of the critical infrastructure, you're a better expert than I am. Some of the critical infrastructure is just too old, if that makes sense. And then they've band-aided on top, slapped on cybersecurity versus built it in, which we've talked about 15 years ago, right? But some of the infrastructure is way older than that. So having a person who can at least shine a light, and that's what generically what politicians can do, is if you're in that government leadership representation area, just say it's important to my constituents and I'm going to lead this effort. So, I mean, just like the White House, there was some great cybersecurity policy that President Biden came out with. But I believe he brought in a lot of experts to actually make that policy happen. And I personally would have rather, instead of Maryland writing their own policy, just adopt the national policy here for our state. But we went in a different direction and said, no, we got it on our own. We don't need the federal help. We don't want to copy any of their stuff, which I think is a mistake because, again, good policy is good policy. It doesn't matter who wrote it, Republican, Democrat, this way or that way. So bringing people together is one of the things we can do in the government. So that was a very long answer to say, we just got to get better at this. And I don't know what the answer is. Just elect people who are going to listen more than talk, although that was a very long answer.
Yeah, I think the ability to listen is a critical skill in our industry. And I think also, as a cybersecurity vendor, right, if you're coming into a situation, trying to be self-serving, as opposed to trying to do the best things for the community, that's the wrong approach. And we have we're lucky in the critical infrastructure space to have a very solid community of professionals who are very passionate about this. I'm seeing more and more, folks across the industry, recognizing that, hey, the open architectures and being able to integrate no matter who you are or what you're with, be it competitor or business to business, are all really important, all really important things in the conversation, because those are enablers. So I do want to do one kind of technical question really quick as we're going through. Cybersecurity costs money, right? There are dollars that organizations have to spend on the cybersecurity front, and that spending may be driven by risk to revenue generating lines of business. It could be compliance based, it could be regulatory requirements, right? But at the end of the day, it's dollars. So especially in today's environment where we're fighting with inflation and just economic considerations that we didn't have a couple of years ago to the scale that we do now, what do you guys think are the minimum essential cybersecurity controls? If I'm a small business, what do I have to do at the end of the day to be able to take care of my business and at least know that I'm doing like my part?
Well, that's a loaded question. And the reason why I say it's a loaded question is because I'm answering it. I think the conventional wisdom is that there are some fundamentals that you should do, right? Like you should have MFA in place, you should do offline backups, there's several different things that you need to do. You need to do some level of understanding, at least around pen testing and threat hunting and some of those types of things. But the reality is that there are realities like there's nearly 800,000 open positions in cybersecurity. And so let me give you a practical example of why this is a problem, and I'll give a potential solution. I was talking to a gentleman at a conference just yesterday, a local conference. He's the single cybersecurity person for a regional bank. They just created a position. He had no cyber background, but he's thrown out a position. I said, what does a week in the life look like? And he said, well, last week in my position, I had to figure out our backup strategy, do a bunch around infrastructure protection. We have an MDR in place, so I had to kind of figure out what to follow up on alerts that were coming in. There are people clicking on stuff they're not supposed to click on, so I had to follow up with them. We're implementing a couple software packages, so I don't really know what they do yet, but they're cyber related, so they're my job. He's literally on and on around all these things he has to do. And I'm like, so what's your biggest issue? And he said, the biggest issue is I can't keep up from an education perspective. So they can't hire more people, and they want to do cyber themselves. So I would contend to some degree that cybersecurity is following a similar trajectory as cloud computing. Because initially, if you back up like 10 years ago, a lot of people didn't trust the cloud. They said, well, we don't want to go to Microsoft Azure, we don't want to go to AWS because we need to control our systems. Especially if you're talking about regulated industries and government. Like we need to do it ourselves. And then people woke up and said, wait, Microsoft and AWS both spend over $1 billion on cybersecurity alone each every year. There's no way we can spend that much. We should maybe dabble in it. And they went, oh, wow, those technologies are better, the security is better, we need to go to the cloud. I think because we have this ever increasing issue of lack of talent, that companies need to wake up to the fact they can't do it themselves. They have to outsource cybersecurity. And I'm not talking about like throwing everything to somebody else and say, you own our security posture, you own our risk. That's not the way it should be done, but it can be done to outsource the correct elements within cybersecurity. And I think that everybody's going to start waking up to that, and that's the groundswell that we need to help this poor guy at this regional bank who is failing, knows he's failing, and has no way out.
Sure. Reed and Terry, y'all just popped off mute. Terry, you wanna go first, and then we'll pass the mic to Reed.
Sure. This is a hard question to answer because I think everybody's needs will be different depending on what industry you're in, kind of what your focus customer is. It's gonna definitely vary. So giving a technical solution is kind of hard in any one way. As JD started off, making sure you're doing data backups, making sure you have proper firewall in place, set up VLANs, all these things. But to somebody who has a clothing store, that sounds foreign, right? Like, what are you talking about? Like, if I say, oh, you need a FIPS 142 compliant, firewall put in place, whatever, it's like, I might as well be Marvin and Martian talking about a Route 36 explosive space modulator at that point, right? So it means nothing really to anybody. So to piggyback on JD and kind of a thing he's been saying, the entire time, which I think has been a great message of education, right? Saying you have to first build a cybersecurity culture, that's really the first thing you have to do. And I think it has to become, we have to help spread it to where it's not now looked at as an add-on, but part of the operational functionality, right? So if I'm a clothing business and I go and I have to buy t-shirts and I have to get a designer and I have to have storage and I have to, for my warehouse, I have to buy a point of sale system. When is the funding going to be put in place for me to buy the protections I need or add cybersecurity into this mix, right? But then you have great things. I do want to kind of just shout out one thing, like the Buy Maryland Cyber Tax Credit, I think it is, whatever, BMC. Just found out about that. I was kind of ignorant to that, but it's a really cool thing that kind of encourages for businesses to use local cybersecurity businesses as well as to buy technologies. And what it does is that it gives like 50% of the net cost back to the company for using a cybersecurity service. So I think some of those things are part of it, but you have to build that culture. So if I'm a clothing company and I now know that I can get a tax credit for doing cyber services, that seems more feasible. Now, cybersecurity is not an add-on. It's now part of that operational functionality for me to make a profit, right? And so now I'm looking at it that way. So I think education, again, JD, said I think really has hit the nail on the head in a lot of ways with that in our talk that, education is a huge part, and put that in the core value of a company, making sure that as a small business, that's a core value of ours is, so protecting, what we have. And I think that has to be it.
Yeah, so I want to throw this in. We've got about 15 minutes left for the panel. We want to make sure that we can take a few other questions from the audience. And thank you guys for y'all's lively participation, by the way. It's great to see that. Should we, as the government, subsidize cybersecurity as a service to help address some of these basic technical needs like multi-factor authentication, visibility and things like that? So Reed and Leslie, as we pass the mic to you guys, if you guys want to pile that into y'all's thoughts, I'd appreciate it.
So I'll go first real quick. Terry, I do believe that tax credit, I actually voted for that. So not to say you're welcome, but I believe that's one of the ones that I voted for because it does make sense. And, I'm generically, we tax people too much. And once you start giving credits, then you have to tax other people more because it's not like we print money in Maryland. But I say that in the sense that cybersecurity has got to be up there in a way and we can incentivize it. I think having just a pro-business state with regulation and taxation helps more. So you have more bang for your buck for your dollar going forward. But back to what you're talking about, JD, too, I think there's an ability, and I think we should encourage people to use things like an MSP to do some of their work. And then you layer on, and I'll connect a lot of things back to what we've talked about throughout, you layer on a security apparatus. And I'll give a shout out to, there's an individual who was a staff sergeant who worked for the same guard unit I was in, worked for me, and now owns an MSP, small business, medium business type of security add-on to an MSP. And that person, we couldn't retain them. God bless them. They're great Americans, but they were their business was blowing up so much in this space. And I think those type of industry examples of how you can kind of outsource this, because I think you outsource more than you should. I'm a bigger proponent of outsourcing than I think JD might be. But if I'm starting a bakery or a clothing store, I don't want to deal with those things. I would rather pay someone else to do that. And my time is better spent baking cookies. So.
I'm a huge fan of outsourcing. Huge. Honestly, I think that is the potentially the panacea for the small business, because they can't do all this themselves. They can't hardly do a fraction of it themselves. And there's experts out there, the MSSPs that are available right now, the good ones, I think are worthy, and I think companies need to be looking at them.
Leslie, do you want to close this one off for us?
Sure. So when I think of small and medium-sized businesses, I think of folks that are probably at that $1 million and under profitability. And so they don't have an in-house CISO, they don't have an in-house SOC and security staff. So they are probably outsourcing if they can afford it. So if they are, I think first you have to look at your business and define what's critical to my business. So if this one thing failed, that would wipe me out. And that's different for every business. So I had a client previously, he was a concierge doctor. And so for him, if his database of clients was breached, their personal information, if that was lost, his business is wiped out. So supporting the architecture that secures that database was the most critical thing for him. Another client was a manufacturer. And so if his online payment system stopped and he can no longer receive those requirements from his customers, that becomes a critical point, because he can send the boxes out later. But if he can't get the input in from his clients, then his business is dead in the water. So first, the small business owner needs to identify what's crucial and core to their business and provide the protection around that. You can't protect everything. Having a good relationship with your MSSP and defining what those core things are so that they know when to reach out to you instead of bombarding you with emails about things that don't really matter is also critical. And then to JD's point earlier, what typically happens with these small and medium-sized businesses is the wire transfer fraud. So everyone needs to look at how do we put in mechanisms in place to be able to safeguard against those. And then recovery. So if you get breached by something that you weren't expecting, like ransomware, to Terry's point, like how do we recover from that? Do we have backups of our core pieces of infrastructure?
Yeah. So my thoughts on this area, right? And I agree with everybody that every business is different, right? What makes a business tick or will differ from sector to sector, from industry to industry. However, there are some universal technical requirements that apply no matter who you are or what you're doing. Dragos has a document called the 5 Critical Controls for Operational Technology. And honestly, looking at that document, even though it's tailored to infrastructure and OT, a lot of them apply across the board, right? It's things like multi-factor authentication, especially when we're talking about remote access, having an incident response plan, exercising that incident response plan and rehearsing, managing and identifying vulnerabilities, right? Having visibility of what you have. There's also the CSI, the CSIS, critical controls, right? Which those align are kind of part of. I think that there are some universal truths that when we're talking about, should we, potentially subsidize somebody to run a, like a SOC as a service effort for small to medium businesses? I don't necessarily know that we have to dictate this is, you must go down to this level, but we need to make sure that we have a threshold, right? Of if we're going to give you these dollars, this is what the outcome we want to see should be. It should be outcome driven more than anything else across those organizations. So we've got about 9 minutes left. If there's any other questions from the audience, we'll definitely take those. I do want to acknowledge a couple of the comments in the chat talking about the perspective of law enforcement. So that's not a background I think that many, if not any of us on the call, truly have. And that is an area where the collaboration and the cooperation between government and industry, between defenders and folks that are, potentially accountable on the legal side of the house, is absolutely critical. And having law and legal experts in cybersecurity and knowing where those folks sit, from a business perspective, is becoming more and more important. And, everybody likes to joke about lawyers, but I love my lawyers. They keep me out of trouble. They help me out. They give me good, solid advice, and they make sure at the end of the day that I'm doing the right things for the right reasons sometimes. And having somebody in your back pocket that's familiar with cyber, I think, is a great thing for every business across the board. And since we don't have anything else, I'd like to take the last 7 minutes or so and just give everybody kind of a minute and a half to kind of give your call to action, right? If you could wave a magic wand, if you could tell everybody, hey, this is the one thing that I want you to take away. We'll go ahead and start with Terry. We'll go to Leslie, JD, and then finish with Reed, and then I'll close this out.
Man, no pressure. I don't really have, I'll be honest, I don't really have just a one major call to action. I think the main thing is that we must keep evangelizing cyber. Again, I'll just kind of steal from JD, say educate, keep educating, still have and keep having discussions like these. I think some other key things that came in, making sure that we're engaging government, small local businesses and local governments in conversations and finding ways to do so. Chuck, something you mentioned I wanted to hear more about, and I wish we had more time to go into it, was kind of talking about the exercises and maybe how that could even play in with small businesses, local governments, and seeing how that part could kind of play more into. But my main call to action, I would say, if I could just point people to a place if they need it. If you're a small business out there and you need, help and guidance in, setting up, Dragos is a great, place to start. But also on CISA.gov, they have a great cyber essentials and roadmap that you can follow to kind of get your business set up in a way that will, or to think about things to set up for your business to make sure that you're cyber focused. So that'll be my one call to action, and I'll go ahead and be quiet.
Yeah, that's a great one. The number of resources that CISA has published and that they will be publishing over the next couple of weeks that are also critical infrastructure sector specific are just outstanding.
For me, it's come up with a plan before you need it. So find that cyber expertise pre-incident so that once it occurs, you're not scrambling when you're already trying to deal with your company falling apart, and then prepare for a disaster ahead of time.
Awesome. JD?
Yeah, I'll pile into something Leslie eloquently touched on earlier, but maybe just a slightly different slant, is I think understanding your risk, your real risk, what you need to protect, not protecting your gold bars the same as your paper clips, and then enlisting the right outside assistance, especially as a small or medium-sized business, because you can't do it all. So understand who are the professionals that you need and can afford to give you a hand on this journey, because it's not also something that you just do cyber and now you're good. Every hour there's new attacks, there's new risk, and so it's a journey, and you got to think about it as an operational expense, not a capital expenditure.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal perspective, JD, and you're right on the money, no pun intended, right? is how we should look at cyber from a business perspective. So thank you for that comment. Reed, over to you.
Okay, I will make the pitch to say cybersecurity and what you're doing in your small and medium businesses is actually a very patriotic thing to do. And I say that in the sense that twofold, really. So one is the fact that if you are breached and you become part of like a botnet, and then you could actually be used and weaponized against other parts of our government, other companies. So you don't be part of the problem. Be part of the patriotic solution to your state and to America, really, at this point. And the second part is what small and medium businesses do is they provide the GDP so America can win wars. I mean, I'm a military person, colonel, hopefully going to be a general at some point. But we win wars not always based on the military might. It's the fact that we have our defense industrial base that makes us great. We have our GDP that is #1 in the world. You need to do your part to secure your business for those two reasons, right? Don't be part of the problem. So all of a sudden you're attacking us. And then just go make money. Go do what you do best. Go make money. Go employ people. Make sure America can continue to be the #1 superpower in the world and do great things. That's my final statement.
Thanks, Reed, so much. So, on my end, I look at this from two perspectives. From a business perspective and also from an individual. For all the business owners and the folks that are doing the good work out and about in the community, as well as state and local government folks, you're not alone. Cybersecurity is hard. There's nothing about this that is easy and simple. And the more advances in technology we have and the more complicated things seem to become, just know that there are a set of basics that if you do those, you're going in the right direction. And you know what? At the end of the day, it's important for you, just like JD said, to understand your risk and to protect what's important to you and protect what's important to the people around you. The critical infrastructure sector in particular, safety is incredibly important, right? That's like the #1 thing, no matter where you go. And knowing what you need to focus on is top priority. And so just know that there's folks out in the community that are willing to help. There are resources out there from the government that are available to use, just like Terry referenced with CISA.gov and the products that they produce. So we're not alone in this battle, and that's a good thing, right? Because the strength really is in the community. From an individual perspective, I would challenge folks who are listening in. No matter where your position is, right? If you are in the cybersecurity community and you have expertise in an area of practice, raise your hand. Don't be the quiet voice. If you have time and availability to support others, and that's very hard. Burnout is absolutely real in this community. And so don't feel bad if you can't. But when you find areas in your career, your personal life, where you've got a little space to give back, right, as a citizen and as a member of the community, I'd encourage folks to find opportunities to do so, to support the folks that are critical to our national defense, who are enabling us to do great things. And then finally, just to close out, the workforce problem is a huge thing for me personally. And as professionals, find those that are excited about the community, that are excited about this career field, help guide folks in, right? As seniors in our fields, we owe that to the future and to our community. And I'd like to just close this and say thank you so much to everybody on the panel, as well as to the folks that are hosting this, to AUSCF and the Territorial Institute. Thank you guys for having us. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you.